Good afternoon, everyone, from wherever you are. My name is Douglas Ogeto from Ludicworks, a video game publishing company based out of Kenya. I'll be the moderator for this session. I do have the privilege of having Michel from Cameroon and Sean from South Africa. Michel representing Joint Play Games and Sean representing Carryfast. So I would like to take this opportunity to welcome them, just to share a bit more about themselves as we begin the session. Welcome.
Hi, Douglas.
Awesome.
Hi, Shan.
Douglas, hey, Michelle. Michelle, would you like to go first?
Okay. It's a pleasure to talk with you today. I'm Michel Pringer from Cameroon. Um, I'm the creative director and founder at Nokema Interactive, a company doing video games and animated future. So we have two teams of game development. The first one is Nokema Game Studio, currently working on Afro Warriors, a mobile game set in um, featuring deities and gods from African pantheon, and for mobile. The second team is Joint Play Games and is working on AMA Chronicle of Lost Stars. Yeah.
Awesome. And hi everyone. I'm Sean. I'm in Cape Town and I'm really excited to be here. So I head up publishing partnerships and business development at Carry First, where we focus on both regional and global deals. Before joining the company, I spent the past 10 years as an entrepreneur with experience in investing and consulting. And a little bit more about us as a company. So we started off as a content creator. We had an app, Carry First Trivia, and we were the number one free-to-play game in both Kenya and Nigeria. And then we pivoted to becoming a mobile game publisher and really enjoying the journey so far.
Amazing.
Awesome. Thank you both for the great introduction. So for this session, we'll be looking at game distribution. What are the challenges, and how at least from both a developer perspective as well as from a publisher, and looking at the ecosystem, and hopefully how can those developers who are entering this space benefit from the same. So to get us started, sorry, this will be directed to Sean. Maybe for those who do not know, could you kindly define who is a publisher and what's its role within the African space?
Sure, absolutely. And effectively, a publisher's key role is effectively the distribution. And so usually a developer makes the game, and a lot of people think that is the hardest part, and it definitely is, but that's not the end of the journey. It's often only the beginning because you can have a great game. It's all about getting it out there. So typically, the role of the publisher is the marketing, the user acquisition, the distribution, doing A/B tests with the creators in order to ensure that the listings of the game will occur, looking at current channels, looking at alternative distribution as well. So there's many different factors. And a lot of other publishers, it very much depends. Some publishers co-develop and come in earlier on in the development lifecycle of a game. Sometimes a publisher provides funding in order to create the game if you're working with IP. Sometimes you have situations where a minimum guarantee is provided to help polish the game in order to finish it off.
Okay. Thanks so much for sharing those insights. For Michelle, being a developer, being a studio, what are, I believe, you have had a journey, from other studio, what are some of the expectations that you perhaps have from a publisher from the continent?
Okay. Um, Video games in Africa is starting to become something very interesting and exciting, and we are starting to have first publisher and distributor focusing to expose video games made by African. So for us as video games developers, we think that publisher is working with a publisher is something important in order to not only help help us video games to fund the games, but also to help to bring their experience to market the game, to build metrics about around the game, um, to connect game developers with resources and other partner that can make that can help to finally have a great game.
Okay. Thanks so much for that. It's it's always interesting to see what how our publisher can be able to support or meet the developer halfway. And I believe Sean, maybe with the experience, maybe in terms of supporting studios on the continent, how will you say that journey is? And what are some of the things that a studio should probably prepare for before they come to a publisher like yourself?
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely, and it's vital, and it's something such as what makes the game good, what makes the game needing improvement, because a lot of people think, let's just say we go get 1 million downloads, you make $1 million. I wish the world was that simple. So a lot of people think downloads equals revenue. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It typically works where there's the monetization model included in the game. And so that's where often a publisher can support in terms of improving the monetization and the game loop and the core economy. What is important in order to get to that stage in making money is retention. And this is something, talking to developers, especially in Africa, but globally, that I'll never get tired of explaining, because if someone doesn't take the time to explain, how are people meant to know? I have a very interesting story that I was chatting with someone in India, and they entered a competition, a mobile competition, and they were one of the finalists. And the judges were asking, okay, so what's the retention? And talking about the metrics, and they had no idea. And again, if you haven't experienced it for the first time, how are you meant to know? So effectively, with retention, that is essentially showing people coming back to your game. And talking from a mobile perspective, the typical benchmarks, obviously different genres, it varies if you're looking more hyper casual or mid to hardcore, but typically it's looked at like a day one retention of 40%, a day seven of 20%, and a day 30 of 10%. And if your game is showing those kind of numbers and it's labeled as sticky, then you've got potential with your game. Then it's about, okay, people like my game. How do I improve it? How do I look at the monetization? Is it more ad based? Is it more in app purchases? And I believe that's where a publisher can really help and take the game to the next level. And so, an analytics tool that I'd like to recommend, I'll recommend two. It's called GameAnalytics.com, and it's free, which is always a positive. But it's free because a lot of the biggest players globally in the industry use it, such as publishers like Voodoo. And then there's also dev2dev.com, where it's free, up until 10,000 MAU, which is monthly active users. And this is great because it allows you the opportunity to refine your game, try various aspects, and see, okay, how popular your game is. Because at the end of the day, games is a bit like art. It is a bit subjective, and certain people might like it, certain people might not. So rather than getting like a friend's view or one or two people's view or even a publisher's view, looking at the data is really important because there you're looking at a larger audience, and that can then help you and say, okay, this is where my game's at. If it's got, let's just say, like a day one of 10% retention, maybe you need to go back to the drawing board or rather focus on a different game. If the game's looking at like 35% or 38% day one, it's showing, okay, it's got promise there. How do we improve it? Then start to work on moving it towards day three, then day seven, then day 10, day 14, and just looking at the analytics. So as I said, playing around with that, it's very important. There's a lot of free resources on gameanalytics.com, understanding the different reports. And if you're able to do this and just understand the game better from what do players look for, you're going to become a better game developer as a result. And then you can work with the publisher even better because you're able to speak a similar language. So bringing that back to the second part of your question about approaching publishers and chatting, I'm a big believer in a rising tide lifts all boats. So we're all here to help one another out. We want to see a thriving ecosystem. We want to see more publishers on the continent. We want to see more success stories of developers. And it's about using that success and helping one another out, providing that level of education so that we're going to have more success, more funding coming in, and more games coming out of the continent.
Thanks so much, Sean, for that elaborate answer. To Michelle, I know you've just not built one game. You've built a couple of games. From some of the technical side, around retention, analytics, etc. Being a game developer now, how would you say you've best grown in some of these areas? As Sean mentioned, building a game is an art. Most of the game developers on the continent, are passionate about their idea, the story that they want to portray to through the game. How would you say, having built more than one game, how do you see this? How do you see you've grown in terms of the technical side of this? Given that a lot of studios on the continent might not have that big of a team at their disposal.
Okay. So, as a game developer, when you're starting working on a project, you have to keep in your mind that when you will launch the game, the retention will keep vary during the time. So it's very important to take in your mind that you have to integrate some technicals technicals feature in your game to 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 have some return from the players in order to have metric to evaluate the retention. Yeah. So in our case, for the game of Warriors, we the business model around the game is we want to make it free to download, and we hope to make money with in-app purchase and with in-app purchases. Yeah. So when the players download our games for the first time, he will enjoy the graphic, enjoy the feature of players and other stuff, but to make them to give them the taste to come later. We will regularly improve features on characters, on new levels, and other things. Yeah. So that's the idea. Oh.
Okay. Oops. Oops. Sorry. My apologies. Um, so let me take this back to, Africa has a thriving gaming ecosystem. The people who might be joining this live from outside the continent,
Yeah.
from a publisher perspective and also from a developer perspective, and this is directed to you both. How big would we say the African market is, and are we able to put a number to it? I know for Sean, from your perspective, it's you're a publisher, you're looking to invest into studios, and Michelle, you're trying to see, do you have a potential market? So maybe to you both, how big is this ecosystem? Is it viable, and why should more people get into it?
Sure. Michelle, would you like to go first?
Take it first, please.
Okay, sure. Um, so, look, at the end of the day, I guess one of the common questions that I get asked about Africa is people talk about Africa as if it's a country rather than a continent. And it's broken down into 54 countries. And I guess there you've got different countries, different, I guess, approaches, different styles, how things are done. And that's the beauty of the diversity of the continent. There's 1.3 billion people on the continent, with the average age being 19. So it's a market that's excited for games and that is very much interested. Um, Something that I've been told by a lot of developers, a lot of companies this past year is we recently closed a seed round. And what that is doing is really showing people around the world, hey, there is a market and let's invest in the continent. And we're really excited about that because if we are able to show people that there's a market here and that will bring more money to the continent, it's a real privilege to be in that kind of position. And we're fortunate to so called wave the flag and lead the line, so to speak. If you look at the market, there's a massive appetite for games, and we could spend a long time talking about the 54 countries or a handful of them. But if I just bring up a couple, so if you look at Egypt as a market, a massive appetite for games. Uh, for a lot of games, particularly first person shooters, Egypt constantly ranks in the top 10 to 15 from a downloads perspective globally. So it's showing there is an appetite. If you look at Nigeria, hundreds of millions of people, a massive a focus of content and consuming content. And for those who aren't familiar with Nigeria and have heard of Hollywood in the US, Bollywood in India, there's Nollywood in Nigeria, and just showing about showcasing local content. And so, jumping from a massive country to a small country as Ethiopia, Ethiopia is actually a country where we signed our first global agreement and first agreement from Africa, which we're really excited about. Shout out to the team at Kene, where we signed a game, Gabeta. And I guess the interesting thing about Gabeta and bringing it back to the diversity and how things are done on the continent. So it's a Mancala based game. But in Nigeria, the game is referred to as Ayu. And therefore, it's important to realize this that localization is key when you're looking at the market and how best to get your games out there. And according to various data and projections, 4 of the top 10 fastest growing GDP countries with the GDP growth rate is in Africa. So it is a growing market, definitely. And we believe that as we unlock the potential, shine the spotlight more, we're going to accelerate that process even further.
Yeah, interesting insights. And for you, Michel, how do these numbers and the market size of Africa motivate you as a developer?
Okay. Uh, in our site, we make projection based on data from um, global number of African that who have access to internet. You know, our main marketing strategy to acquire players is in internet. In Africa, we for the this year 2020 we have something like five 500 million people who have access to internet. So at Nokema, we plan to attract something like 10, 10 million active user during the next 5 years.
Okay, thanks both for that. Sorry. So many some developers on this session will be wondering, Sean, I believe you've been able to go through a couple of, maybe people have been able to apply, to receive funding from you guys. Would you say that there's a particular genre that is big on the continent?
Sure, and maybe I'm a bit biased here because I'm a big football fan. But football is extremely popular on the continent. Ultimately, it just depends on the market and approach. We typically have quite a wide purview of games that we look at. So we look at games from a casual to mid-core. But what's a bigger factor in the potential of the success of games, particularly in Africa, is the size of the app when it comes to megabytes. And so we believe games under 100 megabytes have a big chance of success. But as I said, there are exceptions. Like if you have a FIFA game and it's over 100 megs, people who really like the game and the following, they will download it. Ultimately, this comes down to just device capabilities and it being a predominantly Android focused market. There is more iOS devices entering the market. Uh, you're looking at cases where a lot of secondhand iPhones are also entering the market, which is great. But ultimately, the game's performance is key. What we typically look for is, I guess it's a combination of things. Is it something that's a bit different? Is it a game that can be a classic? Like, as an example, games such as Ludo that are extremely popular in places such as Nigeria. Certain games such as that, card games, board games, just games that can be played for years. Does it have more of an asynchronous element as opposed to synchronous? Because then it allows you to uh, allow people to play online as well as offline. So it's various factors such as this that's really important to take into account when you're considering, okay, why are we approaching this and how we are doing it? Ultimately, we also factor in, we always like to know where we come from and our approach on the continent. But as an example, our CEO, Cordell, who's originally from Sierra Leone, one of his favorite games as a kid was Sonic the Hedgehog, and he didn't identify as a blue hedgehog, but really just felt the game, and that's because the game was fun and good. And so it's so important to create the game and create that experience in the user where people just are enjoying the game and having fun. Because being in the industry, we can get so technical and we know how to create things, but it's always important to remember what is the feeling that the users and the players are getting. And if you've got that feeling and players are getting that, that's kind of what we look for, and that's kind of what we do when we do a test internally with our team, when we get data and we see things. It's so much about that feeling.
Thanks, Sean. For Michelle, you've built more than one mobile game. Maybe could you kindly what genres are these games in, and which of those particular games have you seen a big uptake from across the continent?
Okay, we built uh, for Nokema Game Studio. We are still polishing the game before launching it. So we have Afro Warriors, who is fighting games, and Petit Goal. Petit Goal is a teeny football player game. Yeah, Africa is a country of who like football and sport. So we in our different country in Cameroon, Nigeria, Gabon, we usually have small party of game where we play without complicated rule. When we want to play, we just take a ball and go in a stadium, even a small stadium, and start playing. So Petit Goal is a, a soccer game, and Afuara is a fighting games. Both are for mobiles, Android and iOS.
Okay, thanks so much. So we come to the exciting part of the panel. Everyone loves discussing money. So for Sean, as a publisher, are you guys investing? For a studio, at what level should they expect to be invested? Kindly share more about this.
Sure, no, absolutely. And it's important to be transparent. And so, as an example, we've raised $4 million to date, 1.5 in a pre seed and 2.5 in a seed round. And so everyone thinks, oh, great, they've got tons of money, living the dream. Not so much the case in the sense of approach, because the majority of that goes towards the scaling of games and the user acquisition. So, in terms of where we're at currently, we do offer a minimum guarantee. And what the minimum guarantee essentially means is that we provide a certain amount, and that amount ranges depending on the needs in the game, in order to help finish it off. And that's an amount that is guaranteed, irrespective of does the game perform, because it's always a risk at the end of the day, a so called calculated risk. Uh, what we believe is that what we'd love to do is get in early on in the development life cycle of games, because especially as we hope to grow and be a major figure on the continent, we'd want to get in. But where we're at right now, we're probably about a year to 18 months away from that, fingers crossed at least, where we're currently focused on ready-made games with the retention metrics that we're looking for, and in order to then scale and grow. And once we are then able to stabilize, because we're the typical hyper growth startup, once we're able to stabilize, we can then get in earlier on in the development life cycle of games, utilize our team, engineers, resources, product managers to get in early on in the game. So we have a roadmap, but in order to get to the roadmap, we have to be strategic in order to ensure that we are able to help out. Because if we took our current funding and then in the short term invested in a lot of studios, but without then planning about scaling the games that we've currently signed, we're going to run out quite quickly. So it's all about being strategic. Having said that, there's certain funds that I know that are available, and if developers are wanting to reach out, I'm always pointing people towards certain funds and things that are already available, whether it's in Africa, whether it's globally, because I know how it is. I know that funding the game is often the most challenging part. And I'm a big believer in, if you don't try, you never know. So why not apply to the various funds that are available? Because you might so-called get lucky and get supported. And from that, you can really build a bit of a franchise.
Thanks, Sean. So for Michel, kindly share your funding journey. Have you received any funding? Have you bootstrapped? How has it been? And maybe for those who are listening, there could be an investor on this session. What are some of the ways that you foresee them coming in to support a studio like yourself?
Okay. Um, Before launching the that that venture, I had an experiences 5 years before 5 years earlier with a friend who, and we launched a company, and finally we learned from our mistake. So when I launched Nokema in 2016, I think in consideration that making video games take time and take a lot of money. And in Africa, there are a lot of people who are excited by what we are doing, but it's not easy to join the venture and to give us money to fund our project. So I started the company and I launched a dedicated department to work on the outsource project for other company. So that is still until now my main income resource. Oh, okay. When we launched, some partner joined the company as a shareholder and bring some fund in the venture. And during the 2 first years of the venture, we had the opportunity to have a partnership with MTN Group, who significantly bring fund uh, for the development of Afro Warriors um, and Petit Goal. So that is how we are funding our activities until now.
Um, sorry. So I believe from what we've gathered today, there's still a lot of work that needs to go into building the ecosystem, preparing the developers, as well as getting long-term funding. Um, Before we move into the Q&A session, excuse me, I'm sure there's someone on the listening. I do see some questions coming in. What does the look from where you sit, Sean? What does the future of Africa within the gaming space look for you?
Sure. So I'm really excited for the scene. It's a big personal passion of mine to see more success cases. I'm often making introductions, trying to do what I can, because ultimately you need to have that mindset of looking for the bigger picture in mind. Because we're a mobile game publisher, everyone's thinking, oh, you're always going to say, go with a publisher, do this, that. No, that's actually not what I tell people at all. I believe in finding the right kind of fit. Some people ask about self-publishing versus publishing, and what I say is it all depends on one's skill set and what one is able to do, and just providing that general advice and doing more panels and doing more discussions and connecting with more people such as this, because it's so important. If we can continue doing this and growing things and working together, we're just going to go from strength to strength. It's something that I've done in the past where I've organized a few $1,000s worth of tickets to international events and sent it to developers I know across the continent. And that's great because people may not have been able to afford these kind of conferences. And so I try to use any international ties that I can in order to bring that to the continent, whether it's tickets, whether it's exposure, whether it's various skill up sessions, whatever it may be, because if we can do this and we can continue to do it, we're going to have a lot of success, I believe at least.
Thanks. Michelle, what does for the future look like for you as a gaming studio based out of Cameroon, but I believe perhaps with expansion plan?
Yes, I don't understand what, please. Can you repeat the
Sorry,
question, please?
I'm saying, yes, sure. Yeah. So earlier we mentioned that Africa is a big market. The future for video games is looking bright. For you, what would you say as a developer on the continent? What does the future look like for you? Perhaps both as a studio and maybe what the market possibilities on the continent can offer.
This year, 2020 had a lot of bad period and exciting step for the video game industry in Africa. During the previous 5 months, we had a lot of events and session with experts around all the continent. And due to COVID, everything was online. But the amazing part is that the global opinion, the global audience is currently focused on what we are trying to do in Africa. I think that Africa is the future for the video game industry, and I invite entrepreneur, creative people, developers to join and start making and start creating. It's definitely time to become a game developer.
Okay, thanks so much, Michelle. Thanks so much, Sean, for such an engaging session. I do know we're almost coming to the top of the hour. I'd like to open this up to people from the audience who have questions. I do see one, perhaps this goes to you, Sean. How do you deal with user acquisition campaigns?
Sure. So ultimately, in terms of the user acquisition campaign, it's about testing out how the approach is going to go. So typically, how it works is you do what's called a soft launch, and you gain various metrics and you build it up and you stagger it up, because there you start to work out what is called your CPI, which is cost per install. And effectively, what you're looking at doing is driving down those costs and then growing your potential in terms of your LTV, which is your lifetime value of your users. And so ultimately, it's about doing various approaches. We go through the typical channels like Facebook and Google Ads and using Unity as well. Ultimately, it's typically about finding the right kind of fit and finding what is your strategy, what is your approach. You might have a game that is very IP driven, and then therefore you're going to have a lot of organic downloads, and then therefore that's going to change your ratios, and it's going to change your approach and how you focus on your scale. You might have a game that is mid-core to hardcore, so your cost per user is going to be very expensive. But when you get those users, these are users that spend quite a lot of money. And so as a result, it's about finding the balance, assessing the game, and taking it from there.
Amazing.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Sean. I don't know if there's anyone who has any questions. I think um, the same gentleman is asking, I believe, what's the KPI you're looking for as a publisher, D1, D7, D30, etc.
Sure. Again, genre dependent, but the typical benchmarks are day one, 40%, day seven, 20%, day 30, 10%. Just an additional note, people just an additional note, people who are in the hyper casual space, your day one retention is going to be higher than that. And the reason being is the game is very ad driven and very intensive in terms of mass people at scale. So as a result, you're going to need to have higher retention. And so while we don't focus on that, I always like to share a bit of insight because hyper casual has been very prevalent globally over the past year.
Thanks. There is no other question. Perhaps to Michel, a lot of people would want to play your game. Is it available on all platforms? How can they be able to find your game?
Yeah, the game is currently available on the dedicated website of the games, but we will put it on the Play Store during during the month. Yeah, currently it's available of playapoaria.com/demo.
Okay. Thanks so much. So, I think last but not least, Um, for me, it's to say it's been a pleasure hosting this panel session with you both. I do hope that for those who are listening, that it's been a productive session for you. At least being able to see how this looks like both from a studio as well as from a publisher perspective. I believe FEJA has more sessions in store that are able to help a studio be able to map out the journey of a game developer and how to be successful. I have been your host, Douglas Ogeto. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to the rest of you enjoying the rest of the session that FEJA has for. Thank you.